Thank you so much, Lucy and Susan, for having us. We're really, all of us, and I speak for all of us when I say we're really delighted to be here. We were hoping the anthology would be out already, but it will be next month. As Susan said, Nithila and I will begin. We'll introduce the anthology and then hand over to Subha, who will then hand over to Masshal and Yusra. I'm just going to share my screen. Yeah. Okay, hang on that one. All right. The two of us have been working together a while, and we met, Nithila and I met more than a decade ago, sitting across a desk in an academic office, where one of us was the interviewer and prospective teacher, and the other, the interviewee and the potential student. The interviewer thought the young woman sitting across from her was possibly one of the most interesting, thoughtful, and exciting potential students she had encountered.
The interviewee was relieved to see an interviewer who smiled and nodded and was encouraging even as she asked incisive questions.
A great deal has happened since that overly humid Mumbai afternoon, and we have straddled multiple roles in our relationship: teacher, student, mentor, mentee, colleagues, co-conspirators, tea buddies, co-researchers, co-writers, and of course, co-presenters at various workshops and conferences. And perhaps most relevantly for the anthology we edited together as friends. The idea of the anthology began as a gleam in our eyes in the middle of a very late night conversation. One of those conversations that is intended to be short, but more than an hour later, you find yourself holding the phone, feeling your fingers go slightly numb. We began by talking about friendship in the pandemic, and from there, the conversation ran away with itself. In the past 2 years, with enforced periods of physical distancing and isolation, changing the nature of social interaction, our friendships have grown and transformed in a variety of ways. In many ways, we've recognized the relevance of friendship in our lives in ways that perhaps we had not considered earlier. Friendships have always been support systems that one relies on, even though they are rarely given the kind of legitimacy offered to familial relationships.
On June 23rd, 2021, we put out a call for submissions on our social media profiles and listservs we were a part of. And unsurprisingly, we found we were not alone in our reflections on friendship and community as the pandemic and subsequent lockdowns hit us. Our call for submissions took on a life of its own. It was shared and repeated multiple times, mostly by people we didn't personally know, and the pitches we received only reiterated how much the idea resonated with people across the globe. We were overwhelmed by not just the large volume of wonderful pitches we received, but also by the myriad themes they touched upon.
Friendship is notoriously difficult to define, almost as difficult as defining feminism. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to move the next slide. Okay. Yeah, sorry. Almost as difficult as defining feminism. A large and diverse set of relationships that are often characterized by mutual care, reciprocity, and trust get referred to as friendships. Some friendships last, others are fleeting. Some are based on having a shared past, while others are about becoming together with. Some start out as colleagues and find friendship along the way. Others, who are friends, find opportunities to work together. Some friendships are based on a sense of shared politics, a common purpose. Some others founded on the ability to disagree without malice. And these are not even mutually exclusive. Feminism itself is difficult to define. While feminism seeks social, political, and economic equality for all persons regardless of sex, gender, and is necessarily intersectional, or at least aspires to be, feminist theory encompasses many different positions and often competing perspectives, with a number of theories having branched out of and in response to feminist theory.
While we celebrate friendship, we understand that people experience jealousy, anger, and disappointment as much as love, excitement, and wonder in their relationships with friends. And so this anthology explores friendship as no less fraught than other relationships. Friendships, like other relationships, are strained and fractured by a larger context of divisiveness and intolerance. These politics also frame who is able to call whom a friend and under what circumstances. We are keenly aware of putting together this anthology at a time when there's social recognition of friendship as deeply political.
Friendships, like other relationships, are situated within socio-political hierarchies, even as we recognize the strides ahead that have been made possible structurally, particularly by the feminist theory and activism, not just along axes of gender, but other structures as well, and the individual transformations and sheer joy that have been engendered by friendships in these spaces. We must acknowledge that friendships by themselves have often been circumscribed by the same kind of caste, class, and community hierarchies that attend other institutions. Feminist spaces need to consciously challenge the ways in which friendship might replicate kinship structures premised on inclusion and exclusion. There is something that we need to strive to work on as a movement that aims at justice. Friendship is not immune to disagreement, distance, and disenchantment, but holds within it the possibility of reparation. Even where fractures are unable to be healed, the articulation of dissent, of contestation, is important to a dynamic feminist politics. The constant questioning and challenges are both productive and generative, not just for feminist activism, but also for friendship. Asha Achyutan Dese, and all of the visuals you are seeing are from the anthology. Asha Achyutan Dese in the anthology speaks to the connections between friendship and allyship and what happens when the links break. She writes, "Women looking out for each other" was the latest description thrown at me in some anger by a friend of 17 years as a reproach aimed at how I had moved away from her. I had moved cities, but was not expected to have moved away. I had enacted my version of coming out, but it had been received dramatically, albeit enthusiastically. And sisterhood was reasserted as binding glue, also dramatically, emphatically. And because I did not really have a spouse or children, those stable assets, oblique burdens, to show my share of sisterhood burdens was of course larger. The anger at my inability to fulfill them was proportionately more. And so I asked my easily feminist friend, not so easy for me, in reciprocal anger, does sisterhood stand in for allyship? Do your milestones and your precarities look like mine? Are mine visible to you? Have I moved away or have I gone under? Can we really be friends? Achyutan's work invoked the tropes of sisterhood and what they might mean in relation to differences of sexualities, of families, of households. How does one examine friendship in relation to expectations?
Frictions and fractures are very much part of the terrain of feminist activism and friendships. It is important to recognize both the value of striving to dialogue across difference, but also that sometimes antagonisms are productive in the challenge they issue, demanding that we look anew at our ways of imagining a more just world. The experience of forging South Asian solidarities from the 1980s onwards yields heartwarming stories of friendship and narratives of how feminists in the region sought to counter the hostile geopolitical formations engendered by their states. Their collaborations allowed them to take risks in challenging their states openly and publicly. The 2000s have brought new collaborations, not despite, but because feminist activists are learning to be attentive to an ever more shifting terrain and confrontational politics, even as they recognize the need to unite against the authoritarianism that looms large over the South Asian region. Feminist scholarship has tended to interrogate the neoliberal aspects of individuation that underlies an uncritical celebration of friendship. While it is important to recognize the pitfalls of romanticizing friendships, it is equally important to recognize that deep, enduring friendships underlie feminist activism that has made possible structural change. To acknowledge the potential of friendship to build communities and enact a transnational analytic of care is to be conscious of the ways in which friendships have been profoundly transformative, not just at an individual level, but for feminist activism within countries, in the region, and even globally. As part of engaging with this, the two of us also researched and published an academic paper on friendships forged during and around feminist activism in South Asia. The paper is titled Forging Fraught Solidarities, Friendship and Feminist Activism in South Asia, and has recently been published in the journal Feminist Encounters.
Relative to romantic love, friendship, often a deep emotional connection, has received relatively little attention in both written and cinematic texts. In this anthology, we seek to center friendship, to see it as greatly relevant to the politics of everyday life and well-being. Friendship engages centrally the idea of choice, the suggestion that we usually have greater agency in our choice of friends than we do with romantic partners. Legislated as that choice is by societal rules and regulations, especially in South Asia, where romance tends to be more synonymous with marriage, which is thoroughly embedded in endogamy. The South Asian feminisms have had to grapple with the use of the term South Asia itself, with all its geopolitical implications. The space of South Asia has been strongly contested and fraught politically, and this is something that the feminists of the region have had to contend with. One of us, me, was at an AVID conference in Bangkok in 2005, where I participated in the South Asia caucus, where there were about 300 women, of which over 200 were Indians. It was a stark visual reminder of the fact that the shadow of the dominant big brother, India, played out in feminist spaces as well. Even while recognizing these imbalances, feminists in the region have forged enduring bonds with each other in ways that allow us to grapple with the politics of our own countries and the region. Subha Wijesiriwardena, the narrative built precisely on these visions of South Asian feminist kin relationships. We tried very hard to get representation from across South Asia. We knew that as Indians, our networks in this country were much wider and we would get a much larger response here. We therefore mobilized friends, colleagues, and cold tagged people from other countries on social media whom we thought might be interested in sending us pieces. Yet, despite our best efforts, India is overrepresented in this book. We hope there will be more such books that might mitigate this imbalance.
We went back and forth a fair bit on the title. Yaari means friendship in Hindi, Punjabi, and Urdu. We played with other words that mean friendship, like Maitri, Dosti, and friendship itself. The word Yaari would resonate only in certain parts of South Asia. We wondered what this meant for representation in the rest of South Asia, or perhaps because of the popularity of Hindi cinema, the word Yaari might be known but might not resonate. The subtitle originally read, A South Asian Anthology by Women and Queer Folx. We spoke at length both about the question of Indian overrepresentation that we've already mentioned, and also about the fact that anthologies from the global north rarely locate themselves in that way in titles. Ergo, we dropped the South Asian part. The narratives in this book travels many visions and ideas of friendship and explore diverse emotions. Just as friendship itself resists definition, the pieces in this collection come in various shapes and forms. Comic strips and poems, essays and fiction, as paeans, reflections, and rants. They examine the world not only through the lens of what is, but also what we might aspire to. At the heart of this anthology is the recognition that friendship matters. Acknowledging that deep emotions lie in the interstices of our friendships, we have chosen to order the section by the dominant emotions invoked by the pieces in that section.
Love, friendship, intimacy. Girls, mothers, women, mothers. Resistance, solidarity, solace. Grief, longing, loss. Pandemic, protest, resilience. Distance, disappointment, rage. Virtual realities, technologies, connections. Pedagogy, care, community. Cities, spaces, conversation. It goes without saying that the three words we've chosen in each case do not cover the range of emotions that the pieces in the section explore. As part of city spaces conversations, Masshal, Saif, and Yusra Alvi's Plotted Dosti reflects on their friendship, even as it engages with the city of Lahore, and how their relationship to the city is deeply entangled with their relationship to each other.
This anthology took us less than a year from conception to the draft of a full manuscript. In pandemic times, it sustained us and gave us moments of serious joy. We've often called each other at strange hours, screaming with excitement about a piece we both loved. As academics, we are often seized with anxiety about the validity of our work and beset by imposter syndrome. But as we sent in the full manuscript, we felt neither of these. Instead, we were filled with anticipation and excitement at the community created within its pages and for the possible communities that might be forged with readers.
Thank you. We're handing over to Shubha. Nithila, you share your screen.
Thank you. That was
Yes.
beautiful.
Thanks so much, Shilpa and Nithila. Hi, everyone. I'm Subha, and I'm from Sri Lanka, but I live in New York. And I'll just be speaking to you today for, I hope, not more than about 15 minutes about my, partly about my essay in the anthology, which is titled South Asian Feminisms, or How I Learned to Make Friends. But partly trying also to expand on some of the sort of ideas that I kind of only very briefly discuss in the essay. So I will be reading and speaking and reflecting, and I wanted to just kind of give a little overview of some of the literature that's sort of quite important to this essay, of course, because there are many others that preceded that are really important for me, for that So I want you to know that, an essay published in 2014 by Amrita Chachi and Sunil Abesekara called Forging a New Political Imaginary, Transnational South Asian Feminisms, which was in the Oxford Handbook of Transnational Feminist Movements, is very important here. A series of essays published between 1986 and 1988 by Kamla Bhasen and Nighat Said Khan, which include essays such as Some Questions on Feminism and Its Relevance in South Asia, and the other one that's titled Grappling with Each Other, Action and Theory, all of which I believe were published later in a series of booklets by Kali for Women called Feminism in South Asia. And the other readings of importance here, which kind of feature quite significantly in Chachi and Abesekara's essay, is, of course, Kumari Jayawardena's work in Feminism and Nationalism in the Third World and The White Woman's Other Burden. So I will also be reading concurrently from my own essay in the anthology, as well as an earlier piece of mine called In My Mother's Skin, which is about life after the death of my mother, Sunil Abesekara, in 2013. So I just wanted to kind of give the landscape of some of the literature, because it's part of also what I do in the essays to kind of invoke this legacy, this history. So all of these feminists and all of their work is also very, very important to me and to us. So my essay is partly sort of personal history, and then in some other way, it's kind of an attempt to analyze a little bit. So Nithila, could we move to the first picture? Okay. So I'm reading now from Bhasen and Said Khan in 1988. Imagine a beautifully situated training center near a tiny Bangladeshi village. Imagine this center itself, functional and spacious and green. Imagine the trees, the large courtyards, the lawns, even a fish pond. Then imagine 38 women from Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka spending 1 month there together, teaching and learning from each other. Imagine them laughing, sometimes crying. Imagine the joys, the frustrations, the depressions. Imagine them arguing and even fighting as they struggle to understand each other and the world around them. Imagine friendships made and friendships changed. Imagine the singing, the acting, the making of posters, the daily exercises, and even cooking. Imagine these women grappling with theories and ideas and experiences. Imagine them expanding themselves and adding horizons and dimensions and areas of creativity and entering spaces within themselves that they had not realized existed. Imagine these women breaking down the barriers that are their countries, their religions, their traditions, their backgrounds, their education, and their levels of consciousness. And subsequently, Chachi and Abesekara wrote in 2014 about this, particular event that Bhasen and Said Khan were describing or were writing about. And of course, they were there. So they were really writing from their own experience. Chachi and Abesekara were also there. And I'll sort of point them all out to you in the picture, because this picture is quite special. So Chachi and Abesekara wrote in 2014, it was through this intense process of grappling with each other that a new South Asian feminist consciousness emerged. Unlike a normal training course, the workshop used multiple agendas and methodologies, personal, historical, and conceptual, as well as physical, mind-body learning. The first few days was spent sharing our personal stories with no time limits. As we listened to each other's life stories, there were many instances when, struck by the cultural similarity, one of us would say, if the names and places were replaced, the same story could be my own. Soon, smiles and nods of recognition and sympathy flowed across the room, creating personal bonds across national boundaries. So here in the picture are, so this is Nigat Said Khan over here. Can everyone see my cursor? Yes? Or no?
No, Subha, I think because I'm sharing, they'll be able
Oh,
to see.
okay. I'm sorry. Okay, well,
If you can tell me who it is, I'll point out to.
Yeah, no, it's complicated. That's okay. But I will just say that in this picture are many feminist names, many people that I think we probably all know the names of, if not, we know them. So there's Nigat Said Khan. There's Lala Rukh, who's also unfortunately no longer with us. There's Sunila Abesekara. There's Khushi Kabir in the standing row. From Bangladesh, there's Kumi Samuel from Sri Lanka also, and Citralega Maunaguru from Sri Lanka also. And Kamla and Citralega are kind of together in the picture, Kamla Bahasin, and then there's Amrita Chachi in the standing row as well. So to me, this is a picture of kind of an earlier generation of feminists. And I think the event that they're describing is actually what would become what we all now know as the Sangat training course. So this was actually the first of the Sangat training courses, which I believe have gone on annually every year since then. So for decades now, this particular event turned into this series of trainings, which have been kind of this incredible learning space for young South Asian people to kind of go and become feminists. And I think it's really an incredible kind of history. So that was the first picture. And then could we move to the second picture? Thanks, Nithila. Okay, so this is me being born. And that's Amrita there in the red sort of shawl, and next to her with the red pottu. Yeah, correct, exactly. In the red pottu is Citralega Maunaguru, and that's, of course, my mother, Sunila, and that was me being born in The Hague. And, my mother and Amrita lived together in the same house for many, many, many years in The Hague. After this was the moment I was born, but my mother went back to The Hague at many different points in her life, and I talk about that in the essay. So I'll just read briefly from an earlier piece that I wrote where I said, I was born into the arms of other women. You gave birth to me in a delivery room you had filled with your women friends. Nothing could have been a more prophetic start to my story. And then in the essay in the anthology, I wrote, it is no understatement to say I was born into the arms of South Asian feminists and that then I was raised by them. I think, Nithila, I think we could stop sharing for now, and I'll come back to this just so I can see folks. Okay, thank you. So I wrote, it is no understatement to say I was born into the arms of South Asian feminists and that then I was raised by them. My mother often left us in the care of her feminist friends as we were growing up, and similarly took on caring for the children of her feminist friends at various points in our lives. I grew up with many siblings, therefore, and many other mothers. This was not always as romantic as it sounds, of course, as my life as a child and a young person was punctuated by my mother's long absences as she traveled abroad for human rights work. What I do know is that my other mothers tried to fill the gaps. They tried to make the absences less hard. South Asian feminists were at the center of my formative experiences in my early life. I went to their conferences, slept on the floors of their offices, held placards put by them in my hands at protests, and went about my life as a child taking it all for granted. South Asian feminists baked me my first birthday cakes and had dresses made for my preschool days. They took me shopping for my first bra and bought me my first birth control pills. They taught me two things. One, they always knew how to have fun. Parties with loud laughter, conversation, much dancing, always followed intense meetings and conferences. Protests always included singing, and they used international conferences as catalysts to meet, be together, plot change, and enjoy each other's company. Stories would be told years later about third world feminists in cold winters and strange cities, attempting to topple UN structures and governments, maneuvering the first world with little to no funding, but sharing everything they had. No matter what, these stories were always told with unself-conscious punchlines followed by infectious laughter. They were always able to laugh at the world, at themselves, and at each other. The second is that they taught me that friendship was the most intimate and deep form of love. Their friendships never came second to marriage or biological family. They were each other's family. And my mother always told me they would be my inheritance. But it still took many more years until I realized I too was a South Asian feminist. So I'll stop reading there. So my title refers to the fact that South Asian Feminisms is where I learned how to make friends, who to draw to me and who I was drawn to. In my essay, I reflect on moving to Bangalore months after my mother's death and becoming a South Asian feminist there, moving back to Sri Lanka in 2016 and becoming a South Asian feminist there. I reflect on the fact that South Asian feminisms chose my new South Asian friends for me, but it also constantly recasts my friendships with my old South Asian feminist friends in Colombo. In moving back, I learned that being a feminist was a big part of what drew me to the people I already loved, who I had loved for many, many years. So growing up together, finding your way together, learning the words together. This is a big part of my experience of feminist friendships, of one day suddenly having new words for things that you had talked about together for years. So while the title lets you know that South Asian feminisms taught me how to make friends, I wanted to also say that it taught me how to be a friend. That my mother and her friends taught me that, and they taught me how to treat friends and how to be friends. And I think, of course, I learned that from my mother and her friends, but I also, of course, learned it from my own friends. And a couple of the things that I reflect on or that I try to sort of analyze is I try to understand how South Asian feminist movements have been or are being reshaped or reframed in the context of friendship. And I try to understand it in the context of a couple of different things. One of the things is that I try to understand the impact of some very big events, in the world, in society, in South Asia, and the impact of those events on friendship, and how that would have impacted movements vis-a-vis friendship. And of course, I try to do like a brief comparison of South Asian feminist movements then and now, though, one probably shouldn't do that. But I think it's important just for us to understand kind of the history through the lens of these movements. One is the collapse of unions and left organizing following the kind of the 80s and 90s, and how social movements were reshaped through the collapse of those movements. And of course, the second, I think, Shilpa has already referred to this, is the kind of increasing authoritarianism, jingoism, xenophobia, nationalism within the South Asian context. And so one of the things that I try to do is really to understand the context of class, caste, ethnicity, religion, etc., within these friendships, and how different ours are, and how different our task is in terms of making friends across those lines. This is not to say that South Asian feminists of an earlier generation didn't have to do it deliberately. I'm sure they did, right? Because I think we know many didn't. Many simply didn't move out of their class groups or their ethnic groups, but some did. And I think it's interesting for us to think about how and why. So Nithila, could we just go to the last picture? Yeah, so I wanted to just end with this. This was taken in Colombo in February of 2020, before we knew that we were kind of about to go into a global pandemic. And this meeting was convened by Radhika Kumaraswamy as an effort to bring South Asian feminists together again to reconfirm or to rewrite a set of commitments or ideas that we had written in an earlier age called the Declaration of South Asian Feminists. So this one is now called the Colombo Declaration. And this is myself and some friends from India, Nepal, Pakistan, and another friend from Sri Lanka. You might know these feminists as well. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was to propose friendship, not just as a politics, but as an ethics, to ask, how about what would happen if we made movements like we made friends, and about what would happen if we built institutions on the premise that the people who work there are our friends. So, friendship as a kind of an ethical framework for movement building and feminist institution building, etc. And I'll just end with a last piece from my essay. Feminism asks us to consider that the personal is political and the political always personal. So it asks us to take our friendships seriously as political acts in a world organized in hierarchies where power structures rely on polarization and division. Friendship as political feminist solidarity would mean it is non-negotiable. Friendship means the stakes are very high. And this is the question before us. What are we willing to do for our friends? Thanks, and I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Shilpa.
Thank you, Subha. Really looking forward to reading your piece in full in the anthology soon. So should we just carry forward? All right.
Hi guys, I'm Yusra and this is Masshal. We are going last in this group of people.
So me and Yusra, our contribution to the anthology, it actually closes the entire series, I think, is a photo essay. And me and Yusra have been friends for, I want to say 12, 13 years now. And when we first heard about the open call, we kind of didn't have anything in mind. We just knew two things. We knew that we wanted to work with Shilpa and Nithila because we felt they were doing very important work. And we've been following along for very many years. Why Loiter and such has been so integral to our experiences, I think, as women living in Pakistan. And we knew that we wanted to just use this as an opportunity to invest in our friendship. So Yusra, do you want to just, so we'll just be kind of having a conversation around our photographs and our experiences.
So our contribution to the anthology that was being compiled was this photo essay that in the beginning, we didn't know what we were doing. We just gave our submission in and it was just a bunch of nice words that we had put together, romanticizing our friendship without like a huge concept of actually what these photographs are going to contain. And we were hoping to go into this trying to kind of claim Lahore as our city because we had lived together in other cities and we had grown together in those places, but we had never spent time in Lahore. Especially because when we moved to this city, it was during post-COVID times and we would end up in each other's houses, in our private spaces, and just do the majority of our hanging out in these intimate, non-public spaces. But with this photo essay, then we set out to kind of reclaim Lahore and kind of map it in a way where we could feel more comfortable, take our comfort that we felt with each other into the public sphere. And we started up and mapping it out like very technically. We started with this map in the beginning. The circles are places that we had gone to, and it turned out we hadn't gone to very many places. So we set out to kind of get out of our homescapes into the city span on a larger scale and really see what we can find in Lahore and what will our friendship make of it, where we will feel more comfortable in the city.
Yeah, and I feel like it was an exercise in trust, I want to say, because for me, my relationship with Yusra has been very secure. It's one of my relationships where I feel very secure. So I felt that that would be a great place, like a springboard with which to explore the city, a place that oftentimes felt hostile to the both of us. So the way we started out was kind of just shadowing each other on errands or chores. So this is, I believe, the first photo that we took, and we'll talk you through the kind of constraints and the technical decisions that we ended up sticking to with the photographs. But Yusra followed me to a market because I was buying marble and wood for an interior design project.
Sorry, I want to stick to this for a while because this is the first image we've taken, and this is where we still hadn't figured out the rules for ourselves, that what does this photo series actually look like. And when we came here, there was already several men sitting on these chairs, and we asked them to get up. So you can see one of those men at the back looking at us while Masshal photographs me. And this was, it felt very much like we were asserting our presence in the public sphere. In the beginning, we were like carving our spaces out, but later as we go on, we were already part of the public space, so it didn't matter anymore. We couldn't move people anymore.
Yeah, I think it became much more intuitive. Right now, it was quite nerve-wracking. This is also one of the first few photos that we took. And this is in Yusra Bazaar, which is a very crowded place. Normally, when I go to Yusra, it's very, task-oriented. I go from shop to shop, I flit about, get what I need, get out. I don't think it takes time to do something for myself other than the task at hand. And this was actually a very narrow road, and we're standing opposite each other inside different shops. And I remember asking Yusra to step further back, further back, further back. And I know she was nervous because we were kind of blocking the entrance to a shop. But what I was seeing was this like figure, Yusra, the same size as these rolls of fabric, and she's completely blended in. And I thought it was such a striking image. And she trusted me. And like, this was kind of the beginning of our sort of communication and how we would end up sort of guiding each other, taking photos through this series.
So we kind of switched from running errands to then thinking, what are we doing? Why aren't we just chilling? So we then started loitering. We started also photographing leisure, and we would go out with the intent to now participate in some downtime where we are not stressed about fulfilling a task. So
I think this was after actually an errand.
After a task.
And we explored the neighborhood, which is not something that we would normally think to do. And so we just kind of carved our way through the neighborhood, found a really beautiful park. And here we're still kind of, playing with the technical constraints. We can go forward. And I think at the next image, this is also one of the first few images. I think at this point, we realized that what we want to do is really capture the act of mirroring, which is something that we're relying on when we're occupying public space, which is just leaning on each other, mimicking each other, allowing ourselves to feel more comfortable. And in this photograph, especially because of the perspective of this bridge, that really shines through. So I think almost all of the pictures from now onwards are always going to be both of us centralized in each other's frame and like literally mirroring each other.
And here we'd also realized, like, suddenly we were on this bridge in another really busy part where we weren't moving people, people were still there, and we realized they didn't care. We don't need to kind of tell them to make way for us. Our place was already there. Here we have this excursion where we're in the middle of this public area. It's a nursery. And we had at this point established that we would be taking pictures where our emotions, it's kind of blank-faced intentionality, because we want to really talk about our space in the city rather than our relationship with one another, because that comfort we already own. So it's more about, but in this space, like all of the pictures we have are smiling. But here compared to this shopping excursion, we're not smiling because this is something neither of us really wanted to do. It's another chore, but for that, it's something that came through.
Yeah, and I think it was fun kind of coming back, looking at the outtakes and looking at what the photographs are telling us about how we feel about the space, how we feel about the task, how we feel about each other. I think there were days when we weren't getting along, when we came back, and I think it shines through in the photographs, right? This was a hard day, I think. We were both tired, and I think you can see that. I think another important thing, initially we decided to photograph in black and white because the anthology was supposed to be published in black and white. But then at the time we only had, I think, 5 or 6 images. We now have, I think, close to 20 or more. And we decided to stick to black and white. And I think that was an important decision because of our, I feel, it was important to us to kind of stick to this format and create a language with which we're talking about our spaces. And I felt that black and white imagery was just the way to go. And we carried that forward. And I think we will continue doing that.
Yeah, we both have like this architectural background. So both of us were also really cognizant of this framing where we were using architectural devices to kind of situate ourselves in space, and you can really build a space around us. And that was very intentional. But the thing that wasn't intentional really was that we would show up to these days and we would be mirroring each other somehow in what we were wearing as well. Like we hadn't decided that we would both be wearing long dresses, black and white, but it just ended up happening a lot of the times that we would be dressed really similarly or wearing a certain color palette that would really translate through when we photographed us ourselves and converted the images specifically to this format.
Yeah, I feel like another thing that really came about was the act of seeing, right? This is us on a seesaw. I'm photographing Yusra. Yusra was uncomfortable with the shot because there was a man behind me staring at her. Yusra couldn't see that. I could also see the man who was distorted in the left corner, right? And I feel like the entire series is really just an exploration of just looking and trusting that the other knows and I think we were just learning to read each other and build trust with the public space, as well as relying on each other to help guide us through sort of like a fraught relationship sometimes.
Yeah, like a lot of the times we would end up with shots where one person would see a certain element and be like, go stand there. And then we'd end up with this photograph and the other would just be like, in this shot of Masshal, I was completely blind because she was the one who took my picture first and I was standing in daylight and the sun was in my eyes. I couldn't see a thing. But then later the shot still, just with the act of framing, I trusted Mashal's vision and it's literally that. But it's really cool how this woman who is appearing in both of our shots, how there are other people interacting with our pictures now that we are making our space and not removing them.
Yeah, because I feel like the act of taking an image and kind of freezing that moment is also an act of carving out the city in our image or in our reflection. And that was mostly what we kind of set out to do in the beginning. And that's why we continued doing this, because I think we felt like it was working, right? Taking ownership of the city via our friendship. And for example, in this image, I think this is one of my favorites, with a painting of 2 women in the back embracing, and I think there's a cat in the middle. And it's just fun to like go back and look at interesting things that we may have missed in the moment. Like in this image, I think Yusra was blinded by the light of the projector.
Yeah.
Do you want to speak?
I had no idea that I had this ghost form like hovering over me, while even though in Mashal's shot I have captured the light of this projector, but I didn't know that this person was hovering over me. And on my under my feet is Pakistani written in Urdu. So it's really fun later looking at these Easter eggs, because during this moment, this is at my workplace, I was really stressed because I had a bunch of students and I was embarrassed that I know them, we need to move really fast. And this is a continuation of me in my workplace. And Masshal really wanted a picture of me here because of that painting in the corner by Caravaggio. And I was standing here like, what are you seeing? I go here every day. This is the non-scenic route to the toilets. We shouldn't be standing here.
Yeah, and I think we inadvertently caught two portraits. I think there's like a mosaic of the Mona Lisa behind me, and I hadn't seen that. I just wanted your shot. And it's always fun kind of putting these images together, because sometimes it ends up kind of looking like one space unfolded as well. Like in this image especially, I feel like the building coming together kind of creates this unraveled uniform space.
Yeah, and this is another, in this this combination of photographs, I was really confused by this lady who's appearing in both of our shots, but then we were able to track that she's moving, like she washed her hands and she picked up her bags when she went behind Masshal. And it was really to kind of catch these things, how people are interacting with this space. And this was also
interacting with us.
Yeah. This was also really absurd. It's a public bathroom in a very huge mall, and you enter it and it's an ad about sanitary napkins, and it says that you will feel pain, but you won't get rashes. And it's just really funny. The other thing that would really happen, this is actually one of our most recent pictures from just this weekend. And we started noticing how people around us are so confused. Like this man that you see wearing the plaid shirt in both of our images, it was his rug shop, and he was really curious and concerned. He wanted me to take a selfie. And I kept telling Masshal to stand in this space, and he was like, what are you doing? Take a selfie. You need to record the rug. How will you find the rug later? Because he thought I was a customer, but I had just seen this gorgeous frame mostly.
Yeah, and then this is in my workplace actually. I was teaching for the first time last semester, and I was relying heavily on Yusra because she has experience. And this was at the end of the semester, and you can see all my students behind me, all of their work documented in front of me on the table. And to me, this is a very special image. And Yusra was such an important part of, I think, my my first semester teaching. And I'm glad that we were able to document, because oftentimes what would happen is that obviously we only have like 21 photos. We would forget to document our time together. And I feel like it's been almost 2-ish years now since we've started. Yeah, so there's so many important things that we've missed just because we would go out with the intention of capturing something for Plotted Dosti, but then we would just never get to it.
Yeah, so I think in that way, this was a fairly successful project for us, because we had set out to take ownership of the city, and we have ended up in so many spaces that we had never been to before. And in the beginning, it was with the intention of going to take photographs, but now even with that intention, we forget to take that photograph.
Yeah,
and instead we do have this small collection that we love and appreciate and are happy that it exists. But there's so much else that we haven't covered, and it's really like, it shows with how I feel about Lahore now. I'm able to get out of the house more. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. And this is our last image, actually. And there's actually a fire burning in the background behind Yusra. And Lahore is one of the most polluted cities in the world, consistently for the last few years. And despite that, and despite our fraught individual relationships with Lahore, I do feel like we're now at this point where we are really recalibrating what it means to occupy the city and how to kind of just make it our own.
Yeah, thank you.